Do you wish your managers would quit managing and start leading? Well, when the stakes are high, it's critical that your managers function as high-performing leaders. In today's episode, I'm talking with business owner, best-selling leadership author, and award-winning speaker, Dr. Andy Neillie, about what it takes to become a high-performing leader. In his coaching practice, Andy helps managers learn how to be effective leaders. This is going to be a great conversation, so let's jump in. Welcome back to the Lead with More podcast. Today I'm joined by best-selling author, award-winning coach, speaker, and trainer, and more importantly for this conversation, a successful business owner and leader, Dr. Andy Neillie. Andy, welcome to the podcast.
Tom, I've been looking forward to our conversation together. You and I have kind of gone down parallel paths in different universes. You in corporate world and me in the small business world, but it sounds like we've learned a lot of the same lessons along the way.
Yes, and that's why I was looking forward to this conversation, because the theme of our talk is really about growing managers into leaders. And that sounds simple on the surface, but there's really a lot to it. If it was that simple, you'd have a checklist and there you go, that'd be it. But I'm really curious as to the backstory that you have as to how you came to make this one of the areas of focus.
Yeah. Well, I wish I could tell you it was strategic and purposeful. Tom, I became a follower of Christ very young. Don't come from a church going home, but I found faith when I was a youth and grew up reading the Gospels about this wonderful servant leader who is both leading and laying down his life for his followers. And then I went to work. And one of the very first bosses I had an anger management issue. It was on a construction job site. And if he had a power tool in his hand and you were within about 6 feet, man, you better turn and run. And I'm reading about servant leadership, and then I'm going to work for a bad boss. And I think that really, in some respects, began this, you know what, nobody's supposed to work for somebody like that. And he wasn't the only one. I've, like so many of us, I had a manager that took all of the credit of the entire team. We would just kill it to do a great job, and he made sure he looked good in front of the client and in front of senior leadership. And so it just was one of these growing passions of mine that, you know what, leaders are there to help their people thrive, not just to take care of themselves. And so I've been told since, 7th grade youth Sunday at church that I'm a good communicator. And so I started having the opportunity to use my communication abilities, writing and speaking, and my passion around leadership being leadership and not self stuff. And it really grew from there. It's no more strategic than that, really.
Yeah, there are some self things that we'll talk about when we talk about good leadership, because there are some keys, but it's not self-promotion and self-edification.
Yeah.
We talk about this idea of making a distinction between managers and leaders. And that's one that, I find people have a hard time grasping this difference of what we're talking about. And how do you try to explain it to the people you're working with?
Well, and they're not wrong to struggle with it, because leadership and management are not in opposition to one another, but you can be a manager without being a leader. And conversely, some of the most influential leaders have no official management title. They're just the office that everybody walks to when they need to get something done. I've been looking at folks like you, Tom, for more than 25 years now, and my dissertation studies, the writing that I've done, I think there's a simple leadership equation, but as you alluded to, simple doesn't mean easy. In my best studies, though, if managers are working at growing in conviction, in competence, in character, and in covenant with the people they lead, I call it the 4 leadership necessities. And I don't think we ever arrive as leaders, but if we're growing in those areas, we're on our way to becoming a high-achieving leader. Whether we're in a management position or not, high-achieving leaders are purposefully trying to grow themselves. And And I've tried to net it out with these 4 leadership necessities of conviction, competence, character, and covenant.
Yeah, those are good ones. And,
Yeah.
not to focus on any specific one, but I think the character one is one that really drives me these days, because I see a tremendous void in that area in a lot of the leaders that people hold up to be big
Yeah.
leaders of the day
Yeah.
or whatever the culture. They
Yeah.
have a serious deficit in character. But um, I was really interested as I was looking at your website that you've actually lined this out around a 4-phase approach, and this is where, when we talk about the self part of it, this is where it gets so interesting for me. And I wonder
Yeah.
if we could talk a little bit about that 4-phase approach.
Well, I mean, I think, I mean, you're right to acknowledge character, I think, is at a deficit in the 2020s. And, you and I probably both had to be careful not just to get up on our soapbox, but social media and the misunderstanding around becoming an influencer. True leaders are fair-minded, other-oriented, honest, self-sacrificial, but good people should be that way, right? I mean, the character and competence piece people have been talking about for hundreds of years. Uh,
Hmm.
th- the first element that begins to distinguish you as a leader, I think, is this conviction piece, this bigger picture, this strategic eye. This You're no longer just in charge of your machine on the corner of the plant floor. You're also thinking about, how does our production process impact the entire workflow to allow us to meet our goals? And so you begin to think bigger, broader, further out. You begin to understand competitive inroads and international play in your space. So I think one of the things that I identify managers who are transforming themselves into high achieving leaders is they start by asking some of those bigger questions. Hey, how do I get a hold of the company's P&L and begin to understand what my team's responsibility is for that P&L? That's an insight that managers may not have. You and I both have shared with people over the years. In some respects, the simple definition: managers are in charge of things, people are in charge, leaders are in charge of people. It's more complicated than that, but part of it has to do with, am I leading my people into the future?
Yeah, and that's, like you said, it's not quite that simple, but it does get you started down that road of understanding that you manage tasks, you lead people.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
easy. It's an easy enough way to get that, to start
yeah,
making this insight,
yeah, exactly.
and then you start talking about people. It seems to me the place that you begin is one of the places I begin, is how aware are they of themselves. That's the self part of it that I think is important.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, and so part of what I did a number of years ago, I aligned with an online self-assessment tool, a rigorous tool that the Wiley Corporation has developed over, many decades. They've got a disc underlying to their work of leaders assessment, led to a best-selling book, and I really plugged into it when I was finishing my dissertation. But being able to hold up the mirror and get a sense of, you'll never be a better leader than you are a person in some respects, is part of what you and I recognize, that I think you can be a bad person and have short-term results because you crack the whip or you push through or you grind, but long term, um, people work for people they respect. And was it Covey, I think, that said in his book, 30 years ago, the 7 Habits book, people join organizations for the job, they leave because of their manager.
yeah,
I mean, again, I'm not sharing anything that you haven't shared with your listeners any number of times.
but it
It's
can't be said enough.
No, that's right. That's
This isn't. That was one of the things that always struck me, was people approached leadership education as a one and done. You take a course and all of a sudden you're a leader.
certified.
No. And that actually, one of the parts of what I see you doing is that you're trying to encourage people along these lines of, look, it doesn't
Yeah,
ever stop. You should be continually growing. There's things that I've learned. Um, we talked about this. How is it that we learn so much through these bad experiences? And I hate that it's always been through either failures or bad experiences, but but my goodness, you learn some really important things.
Well, and I'm not a quick
And
I'm not a quick learner, right? I gotta beat my head against the very same wall 3 or 4 times till it's kind of bloody and bruised before I finally start realizing, "Don't do that again, Andy. Don't." The first the first person that uh, my boss told me I needed to fire. Part of my team, I needed to let this person go, and I fought for this person's job, convinced my boss to give this person another chance, and thought I was being this nice boss, and really in support of my people, and called this person in to have that hard conversation and put them on a performance improvement plan. But I saved their job. They quit on the spot. Started swearing at me, started swearing at the company. I was leading a sales team at that point, stomped out of the office, went to work for one of our competitors and took business from us. And it's like, oh, so you mean part of character is having enough of a backbone to have the hard conversations and not let people skid. And in fact, Tom, I see you nodding your head and chuckling because people that have done that very thing. I walked out into my weekly meeting with the rest of my sales team, and this person had stomped out, swearing and screaming, and made an ugly scene. I'm trying to collect my thoughts before I walk out to see the rest of the team. I walked out, and the first thing this other salesperson said to me, he said, "Well, it took you long enough," because they thought I had finally fired her because they knew she needed to go.
yeah,
I was being a wimp. That's that character piece. I wasn't being as strong as I needed to be, and I was impacting the other 7 or 8 people on my sales team because I was letting this person get away with stuff. That's really a character thing, isn't it? Am I being other oriented enough to serve the greater good of the bigger team?
yeah, and I've seen it go the other way. In fact, that's what I have been guilty of being unwilling to have the uncomfortable, difficult conversation. The
Well, and then I think it's exacerbated in the 2020s because social media all day long makes people look good and smart and winsome and successful, and so that's what we think influence looks like. No, influence is grinding. It's doing the prep work ahead of time. It's holding the hard conversations. It's being other oriented. The whole character piece of leadership that I mean, you and I have to be careful because I don't think the 1950s presented any better world of character rich people than the 2020s. We probably just had less access to the instant gratification that we have every time we pick up our our smart devices. Were there bad bosses for our parents? Undoubtedly there were.
Yeah, we also didn't have quite as much anonymity as social media affords now, as you don't really have to be as responsible about what you say. Um, yeah, that's another thing. But that's the piece, especially with the hard conversations. I know we're standing on this
Yeah.
subject quite a bit, but that to me is that's the difference between the leaders at the top
Yeah.
and everybody else.
Yeah.
I remember when I was getting into higher levels of leadership, they said, "Look, most of the decisions that you face could be made by an eighth grader.
Yeah.
You make your money on those 5%
Yeah.
of the hard decisions, and you have to be willing to make a decision and take action and risk being wrong about it."
Yeah. And that always sounds high and mighty, but that means Tom has been wrong. Andy has been wrong. You've cost your company time and money. You've impacted employees and customers, and so have I because you've been wrong, but you got to take that risk. It's interesting because post COVID, Tom, I will tell you one of the number one requests I get from my clients is, "Hey doc, can you come in and teach my emerging leaders about how to hold hard conversations?" Because I've got this kind of pet theory. I don't need to spend very much time inside an organization. You show me where the hard conversations are taking place well, and I'll tell you who the leaders are. Because
Yeah.
as you said, all the easy conversations get made before they get to that office.
Yeah, they should be anyways if you set up an organization that you've been able to delegate authority to. But um, I had a conversation like that with a business owner recently, and was having questions about their own leadership. And I said, "Well, do you have a lot of turnover?" "No." are you able to spend, how much time are you spending in the business versus on the business? How much time, and it was a good mix. And I said, listen, I don't think, quick diagnosis, I don't think you need a lot of leadership work. There's
That
always
road,
stuff you should learn.
yeah,
But it
yeah,
was in other areas. It was actually market issues, and that's all marketing. And I'm not ashamed to say I don't know anything about that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Uh,
So I am
but
I'm launching a athletic leisure wear fitness brand in the next couple of months. Fit Old Dog.
wow,
You can see the logo on this shirt.
yeah,
I don't know anything about marketing through Instagram, but the marketing people around me are saying, "Yeah, Andy, you can't just put this up on your LinkedIn. That's not where the buyers are going to be." Well, the smartest thing I can do is say, "Great, I'll be creative. I'll be fun. Man, you go do what I don't know how to do, because if I do it, we'll get maybe 300 people to join the movement, and
yeah,
maybe more to be said than that." So I think
you'll
you've
get
probably
stuck.
identified another reality of leaders. Leaders hold things with open hands, right? They don't need to hold on to things. They open their hands up.
Yeah, there's some revelations that if you ever come to it as a leader, it's tremendously liberating. One of those is the fact that you don't have to be right, and you could admit when you're wrong. In fact, it works really well. And then the other thing being, this is a side note, is I read a lot, but when I gave myself permission to not finish books, that
Uh,
just opened everything up, or
oh,
take
good,
notes on everything I read.
good for you.
Um,
Wow.
although with the technology we have now, it makes it really easy to keep up with all that stuff. So,
Yeah, but
but I
that
do
is a
that.
freeing thing. First chapter, table of contents, preface, introduction, last chapter, and be done with the book, right?
Yeah.
Just move on.
Uh,
Yeah.
and I guess speaking of books, I do want to mention at least one of your books, The Golden Principles, because um, that was a great way to compile this information. A lot of what I'm assuming you bring into your coaching and your training and experience, and you based it around your work, your experience with golden retrievers.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, and boy, I appreciate you asking about that. You can see I'm working out of my home office today, and in behind me is our most recent rescue. He's sleeping next to the dog pillow my wife has on the daybed in our den. We've rescued 15 dogs over the years of our marriage, and as I was finishing my dissertation, I had a keynote speech, Tom, I was delivering called The Redford Principles. And you've looked at my book. Redford is on the cover of my book. He's the first chapter.
mhm.
Started talking with a small boutique publisher who said, "Man, you got any other dog stories?" And I just realized 25,000 pages of dissertation, reading and writing, and 5 million frequent flyer miles of interviewing leaders globally. I think I learned more about being a good leader from these rescued dogs who came to us in various states of abuse and neglect and trust issues, and so I I think it's all about the dogs, and getting down to their level, starting every day fresh. A proactive yes is better than a reactive no. These are lessons we had to learn from our rescued dogs, and dadgum, those are good leadership lessons, aren't they? And
They are. I love the fact that you connected that because, and this goes to another key leadership principle, is the ability to communicate something effectively. And anybody who owns dogs, I was telling you as we were talking as before we hit record about a dog that somebody dropped off in our neighborhood, and we had to learn how to get the dog to trust us before
yeah,
we could. And
yeah.
now it's part of the family, and it's what a wonderful dog this is, by the way. But it was so good of you to be able to connect those
Oh,
principles because and now we got to be
yeah.
careful. We're not saying if you're a leader, you treat your people like dogs. Don't do that.
No, but you honored me by telling me you dived some into my book, and the whole story of Redford is this abused, neglected breeding sire at a horrible puppy mill with a bad environment. Man, when we rescued him, it was like the day we took Redford home was the very best day in his life. But he didn't know that. He didn't know that for well over a year. And the things my wife and our family had to do to get Redford to trust us, it took a long time, and we'd take,
Yeah.
one step forward and 0.97 step back. I remember, Tom, I think I talk about it in the first chapter of the book. I'd come home from a late night training engagement, drop my suitcase in the hallway, yell out, "I'm home!" Kind of let everybody know that Dad's here. Let's all get together and hug and be happy. And man, me walking into a dark house at midnight yelling out, "I'm home," was exactly the wrong thing to do for a dog that has spent the first year of his life scared with his tail between his legs. And I was the one that had to learn, man, when you get home, come home quietly, get down at their level, let him come to you. Well, that's kind of anti-social media influencer truth, but that's some good leadership truth there.
Yeah, and it works if you're the leader. It works if you're trying to coach and train people, and you have to start wherever the
That's
people
right.
are.
You can't
And
meet him.
if you try to talk too far beyond them, I was having this conversation with somebody else about this idea of work-life balance, and I don't I don't like that term because I think there's a lot more to it. And you and I would have a conversation about that is different. But for somebody that hasn't thought about it and studied it, you'd start where they are. And that's a
Yeah,
lot of what you were talking about.
yeah. That doesn't mean you leave them where they're at,
No, you don't stay there.
but if you're a leader, you meet them where they're at so that you can move them forward. That's that whole, leaders are at the bottom of the pyramid. They're not at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
That was
So
another thing, whatever it is. It's just, I never liked the idea of that pyramid with the leader at the top.
yeah,
I preferred it to be inverted if we were going to use a
yeah.
pyramid, but I actually really preferred the cloud concept a little bit
For
better.
you. Yeah,
But
yeah,
I have to say that I still use the pyramid because there's a lot of people that's what they understand.
yeah, yeah,
And you just have to talk to people where they are, use
yeah,
the language they understand.
yeah. Well, and
So,
that's your application of what I called the Redford principle. Trust takes
mhm,
time. You gotta you
yeah.
gotta meet them where they're at to bring them to where they need to come. Yeah,
We were talking a little bit about character in leaders and what a critical thing we both
yeah,
see that as being, that this idea of servant leadership. And I'm like you, is a lot of that comes from my faith too, is where that's what I'm trying to do. But I look
yeah,
at this and wonder what do you think? Why is there such a disconnect in that? Why do we see so many leaders that seem to be gaining traction, but they don't have a lot of character?
yeah.
Do you have any theories on that?
Oh, well, I mean, if you and I could write that book, Tom, we both could retire full time and become a million copy bestseller. I think that the the world that we live in is a short-term world that celebrates success rather than depth. And so that gets reinforced, every time I hit an Instagram click. It's subtly that little
Hmm.
dopamine hit of somebody that outsmarted somebody else, or somebody that looked better than somebody else. And subtly this kind of gets buried in the back of our brain. I think we've moved past the Gordon Gekko, Wolf on Wall Street, Glengarry Glen Ross caricatures of bad leadership. But what we haven't really moved into is, the moral underpinning of the Western mindset that says leaders are, first of all, humble. I think that's being lost in the 2020s some because of, social media and instant gratification and the success story everybody puts up. I'm in a small men's group on a weekly men's group, and we talk about this a lot. I've got one of the guys that shows up in the men's group is a leadership coach and consultant, does part of what you and I do. Never been in a corporate position, never managed a team, in some respects, this person, in my mind, just doesn't want to get a real job and go do the hard work so that you can learn those
Mm.
lessons. But in the 2020s, it's easy to put up a social website and be clever and have people want to follow you. And
Yeah, you can build yourself up, and it goes
yeah,
back to the thing. If you're doing it to build yourself, then
yeah,
your motivation isn't aligned right in my mind.
yeah,
Is
exactly.
and there's a lot of talk about this. Unfortunately, it takes a lot of years to get to this point. If you realize there's a greater purpose in this other than just building up
Yeah.
yourself.
Well, and I think
And
a lot of years, and and it, and don't just keep having the same year over and over and over again. That's I alluded to earlier. I'm I'm I got to learn the same lesson 3 or 4 times before I really learn it. The the wise young leaders that I get to work with, she learns a lesson one time. He gets it and moves on, and that's where I have great hope for some of these young leaders that I get to work with because they're wicked smart and they're other
yeah,
oriented and they learn
yeah,
faster than I learned.
yeah. And if you can kind of combine some of the wisdom with some of the energy and the new thinking and it's a tremendous combination if you can get people to see it.
Yeah.
My experience was that I could have somebody explain something to me and I would understand it, but I really wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until it failed that I could look back and say, well, I think I see it now. And I wish it wasn't. It's got to hit you in the head and you've got to fail at it before you really get it. But it's a great teacher, but it'd be nice if you could avoid having to use that
Yeah.
as a teacher.
Painful teacher. Yeah. I learned that. And if I'm married, if I've got a family, that was an expensive lesson, not just for me, but maybe for all of us. Who knows? I was with a
Yeah.
sales leader this morning and the market is just flat right now, and the industry he's in is not down, but it's not up. His sales team has got really good pipeline promise, but it's not coming in a timely manner. They keep getting the not no, but not now answer from clients and prospects,
Yeah.
and it's like, man, you just keep your hand to the plow because it's going to turn at some point. But in the meantime, you got to tighten the belt. You got to be more strategic about marketing, and you got to help your sales team realize they're probably not going to bonus this year the way they're used to bonusing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we talked about your book and I encourage people to read this book and I'm going to be promoting as much as I can anyways. I'm going to be promoting it on social, whatever, because it's a great book. A lot of great principles assembled in one place, but you've got a good website, the Neillie Leadership Group. You
Yeah,
do a lot of this work. You consult with people to try to help walk them through this. There's a piece of this that I think is missing, not from your standpoint, but from what most people miss, is that it's not just about reading a book. It's not, if you can couple that with some way of capturing it and applying it, and it usually has to be with help from somebody like you that really knows it, but knows how to coach and not just lecture and mentor,
yeah,
and
yeah.
and
Well,
so
and
I want to talk a
Tom,
little bit about that.
sure, sure. So I come alongside senior leaders and emerging leaders, help them hold up the mirror some. I typically use a self-assessment tool to help them capture where they're at and where they want to
Yeah,
be. Yeah. I've got a 360 tool that does the same for team leaders. And then we develop a plan that helps them address what they want to address to become the type of leader you and I've been talking about. And I bucket things into these 4 areas conviction, competence, character, and covenant. And how are you growing in each one of those areas? But as you and I both know, leadership is also a journey. I have a bunch of repeat clients because we never fully get it done, right? And so we come back next year and, hey, Dr. Andy, I can I get some time with you? And boy, Tom, I don't have all the answers. I've made enough mistakes that that I can say, man, don't do what I did, or let's think about this, that outside perspective. And so I have a program that I call the Mangers Ascent that really is an opportunity over a year to build in and develop that awareness that leadership is different than management. And it includes, as you said, some reading, but a lot of it is really self-reflection. How'd I do in this? We've got a simple coaching model that we help leaders with. I was working with a team a couple weeks ago, and they recognized one of the areas that they weren't working well as leaders is they were managing tasks, as you said, but they weren't really helping their people get better. They were just going in and doing, firefighting rather than forest management,
Yeah.
maybe. So we talked about, how are you holding consistent conversations that are coaching conversations, skill and behavior and mindset conversations, not just firefighting. So I work
Yeah.
alongside individuals inside organizations, developing a path for them to develop as leaders, and all I can bring to the table is that I've made a bunch of mistakes, and I have led and owned and sold and been involved with business. I think one of the things that both you and I bring to the table that a lot of folks on social media today, they've read 12 books, they've gotten certified by 3 different teams, and they call themselves a leadership person. I had
Yeah.
175 employees that ultimately reported up to me and a team of 12 managers, and man, if they weren't yelling at Andy when he made mistakes, they weren't doing their job. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Unfortunately, sometimes if you haven't lived it, it's hard for you to really know it. It was difficult for me to understand the idea that if you're the person in charge with all the responsibility, that exactly how much that could cloud your ability to make good decisions. And my coach that I was using was really good at being that outside
yeah,
voice
yeah,
that
yeah,
could see what was going on and recognize things. Um, it's just
yeah,
it's good
yeah,
to have that. I think people
yeah,
miss that, but I think it's important to draw
yeah,
attention to the type of
yeah.
work, and I'm going to make sure that we've got links to everything in the show notes, because I think it's really good if people are even interested, they could go out and take your assessment. It doesn't cost anything, and it's just a way to find out, look, this is where you are, this is how we could potentially help.
Well, and it's interesting because that outside perspective you talked about, I think it was one of my successes, but it still feels kind of like a scary failure. I was a CEO reached out to me 3 years ago and said, "Hey, can you help us groom the COO? I want to be out of here in a few years. Can you help me groom the COO?" And so we entered into one of these coaching arrangements that you and I, when we get to work as that outside voice, we love doing. And what came out after about 5 months was this guy is not going to make a good CEO. And in fact, he self-selected out of the organization after a while. And I thought, oh man, I'm going to get fired. This is going to ruin my reputation. This is just kind of, whoa, man, did Andy fail? But not really, because I helped prevent a company from putting the wrong person in the key seat. Hopefully help this guy
Yeah.
from moving into a position that he was miserable in every day. But it still scares me a little bit because it's like, whoops, that didn't happen the
Yeah,
way
but
they wanted it to
how
happen.
how often does it happen that somebody gets put into a position of supervision or leadership and they shouldn't have been, and they do have to find out the hard way? There's really not a path back. And
That's right. Yeah. So
I was thinking as you were telling that story earlier about the group that recognized the fact that they recognized the issues they were having themselves, that they weren't being the leaders they need to. That to me is a success. That's a win. If you can get them to the point where they recognize that. Now they still need help. You still
yep,
need somebody
yep,
to stand by there. But
yeah, yeah. But once
I
that level of self-awareness is the key, right? You get your eyes open.
yeah
The Toms and the Andys and the Patrick Lencioni's and John Maxwell's and Stephen Covey's of the world, everything you need is out there, but it's got
yeah
to start holding up that mirror like you and I've talked about for
yeah.
30 minutes now.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's exactly why when and I'm sure you're in the same boat. Is it's not just a nice little menu of options you can choose. If someone like you or I are going to go in and help an organization, we have to spend some time to get to know exactly what their issue is, what their problem is, what they think they're, and try to tailor the solutions they need. Now, it may use a lot of the same tools,
Right.
but it's important to know that. Well, I could sit here and talk about this stuff all day.
I knew we were going to have this kind of conversation when you and I were getting prepped for it. This is going to be this is not really going to be an interview. This is going to be a dialogue between a couple of old dogs that have seen it all and done it all in some respects.
Yeah, I'd prefer that because I'm not that great of an interviewer, and I'm willing to admit that. But I do want to, and I tell you how I'd like to kind of wrap this up is if you were, I don't know how you can do this, so this is going to be your challenge. If you're going to leave us with a thought or a key takeaway, something that, it's like if you get nothing else out of this, get this. What do you think that is?
Well, I think it comes back to the very first topic you led us into. You will never be a better leader than you are a person. Leadership starts with you. And very practically, Tom, I call it the leader's hour. It's not necessarily a 60-minute, but the best leaders I've worked with, they start their day out, maybe with some fitness activities, some spiritual discipline, some journaling, taking a look at the to-do list in front of them and their scheduled appointment, that making sure that they're ready to lead well that day is a very practical way to lead yourself well. Start with your own version of the leader's hour.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I have it in my notes to ask you about that, and I forgot. So I'm glad you mentioned that because that's perfect. That's a big thing at the beginning of a day. That's something I do. I think everybody I know that, that's why I get up at 5 a.m, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, I have enjoyed our conversation. It may be that what we need to do is at some point find a time and do a follow-up and compare notes again. But I've really enjoyed. I'm glad we were able to connect.
Yeah, me too. Thank you for reaching out. And 6-month Redux would be an honor for me.
Yeah, it'd be fun. Anyways, I enjoy these conversations. So
me too. Me too. Good.
But thank you.
You bet. Thank you.
Effective leadership is all about intentional, continuous growth. If something in today's conversation connected with you, or if you know a leader that could benefit from his expertise and experience, I would encourage you to reach out to Andy. I've put his contact information in the show notes. This podcast is all about helping leaders grow in their influence with practical steps to build character-driven leadership. If this resonates with you, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next episode. Until then, keep leading with more.